A Roman soldier who returned from battle with serious wounds faced an uncertain future. Survival depended first on reaching the camp and enduring painful medical care. But even recovery brought new challenges. Some men healed and returned to the ranks, others were reassigned to lighter duties, and many were discharged with scars that shaped the rest of their lives. Their fate could mean honor, hardship, or silence, yet their struggles reveal the hidden cost of Rome's power. Number 1. The battlefield aftermath. When the fighting ended, the field was a dangerous place. Broken shields, bent spears, and fallen men covered the ground. Roman discipline demanded that soldiers regroup quickly, so the healthy formed ranks and followed the standards. But the fate of the wounded was more uncertain. Rome had no special evacuation units. If a man was still alive, his comrades decided whether he would make it back. Soldiers often used whatever they had: spears tied together with cloaks to form a stretcher, or a shield turned into a sled. Sometimes a wounded man was lifted onto a mule if one was available. Most of the time, he had to lean on another soldier and try to walk. This was not charity. It was survival of the unit. A contubernium, the group of 8 who shared a tent, was responsible for each other. Leaving someone behind meant breaking that bond, but slowing the march too much could put the whole formation at risk. The Roman column could not stop for a single man because enemy cavalry or raiders often circled back to finish the stragglers. The march itself was another battle. A wounded soldier was carried for miles across rough ground, over ditches, through dust, or in heavy rain. Blood loss was constant, and exhaustion pushed even healthy men to their limit. Helpers rotated, with some carrying while others guarded the sides of the column. Water was given in small sips, just enough to keep the wounded awake. A belt pressed against a wound, or a cloth stuffed into a gash, was sometimes the only first aid before reaching camp. Infection was already a threat within hours, but the immediate goal was to get him past the gates. Officers knew the cost of losing men, so centurions kept strict count. If someone went missing, the optio, the second in command, sent small groups to sweep nearby ground. Even then, many were left behind, too weak to keep up, their cries fading as the army moved on. Survival depended on loyalty. If a soldier had close friends, his chances rose. Without them, his chances were almost nothing. Ancient accounts describe how comradeship often decided whether a man lived to see the surgeon's tent. Terrain also mattered. Open fields meant quick marches but no cover. Forests slowed the pace but offered hiding places from enemy patrols. In heat, blood flowed faster, weakening men quickly. In cold, wounds stiffened, and hands froze around makeshift bandages. Flies, dirt, and dust made everything worse. Still, discipline was the invisible stretcher. The column never stopped. The horns kept the rhythm, and even half-conscious men tried to match their step to that sound. For a soldier wounded in battle, the aftermath was less about medicine and more about endurance, comradeship, and luck. The journey from battlefield to camp was the first and most dangerous stage of survival. Number 2. The Roman Field Hospital. When a wounded soldier reached the camp, his next hope was the valetudinarium, the Roman military hospital. Unlike many other armies of the ancient world, Rome built permanent medical facilities wherever legions stayed for long campaigns. These buildings were carefully planned with corridors, small wards, and even drainage systems to keep the air cleaner and reduce foul smells. They were not luxurious places, but compared to the chaos of the battlefield, they offered structure and the chance of survival. Inside, medical staff were waiting. Roman medici were not simple healers, but trained professionals, often with experience from many campaigns. They studied Greek medical writings and learned through practice on real wounds. They carried bronze or iron scalpels, bone saws, forceps for pulling arrows, and probes to search for fragments. Their toolkits were compact and organized, which let them work quickly under pressure. The soldier, however, faced a painful reality. Sterile conditions did not exist. Surgeons worked with bare hands, and instruments were only rinsed in water or wine. Infection was always the hidden enemy, and many men who survived the first treatment later died of fever. Treatment began with cleaning. Wine or vinegar was poured into the wound to wash out dirt and blood, which stung but killed some bacteria. If a missile was lodged inside, the surgeon tried to extract it using hooks or probes. If bleeding was severe, they heated an iron rod and pressed it against the flesh to seal the vessels. The smell of burning tissue filled the room, and assistants had to hold the soldier down. For broken bones, splints made of wood and bandages of linen or wool were applied. Dislocated joints were pulled back into place with brute force. To manage pain, doctors sometimes used mixtures of opium, henbane, or mandrake, though doses were uncertain and risky. More often, soldiers relied on strong wine to dull the senses before the procedure. Despite these harsh methods, Roman surgery achieved results. Archaeological evidence shows bones that healed cleanly and skulls with signs of trepanning, where men survived for years after. Many soldiers lived through amputations, their stumps sealed with cauterization. Records mention soldiers returning to duty even after serious injuries, proof that the system, while brutal, was effective for its time. The valetudinarium was not a place of comfort, but of discipline, skill, and endurance. It showed that Rome treated its soldiers as valuable assets, willing to invest in their recovery so they could fight again, or at least serve in another role. For the wounded man, the hospital was a gamble, but it was the only chance between death on the field and survival within the empire's ranks. Number 3. Fighting infection. Surviving the first hours after being wounded was only the beginning for a Roman soldier. The real danger often came later, when infection set in. Without modern antibiotics, even a minor cut could become deadly once bacteria entered the body. Roman doctors understood that wounds which became swollen, hot, or produced pus were a sign of danger. Their approach was basic but surprisingly practical for the time. They often tried to drain infected tissue with small cuts or metal probes, allowing fluid to escape. They also applied natural substances. Honey was widely used because it slowed the growth of bacteria and kept wounds moist, which could promote healing. Herbal remedies like vinegar washes, wine rinses, and poultices made from plants such as garlic or myrrh were also part of treatment. These methods did not cure every case, but they gave some men a fighting chance. Diet and rest were just as important as direct medical care. Soldiers recovering in the camp hospitals were usually fed simple meals of porridge, bread, vegetables, and diluted wine. It was not rich food, but it provided carbohydrates and hydration, which helped the body fight off infection. Protein was less available, but when possible, meat or fish was added to help with rebuilding strength. Doctors and attendants believed that a steady routine of food and water could improve survival. Bandages were changed as often as supplies allowed, but in large campaigns, linen was limited. Dirty cloth and unwashed hands often reintroduced infection, and the smell of rotting wounds was common in hospital wards. When infection spread too far, the only option was amputation. Roman surgeons were not afraid to remove an arm or leg to save a life. The procedure was quick but brutal, done with knives and bone saws. Once the limb was gone, the stump was cauterized with a hot iron to seal blood vessels. Many soldiers did not survive the shock of blood loss and pain. Those who did were permanently disabled. Life after amputation was difficult, but not always hopeless. Some men were given lighter duties in the army, such as guarding supplies or serving as clerks. Others were discharged with pensions or land grants if their service had been long enough. The fight against infection showed the limits of Roman medicine, but also its achievements. They lacked the tools to eliminate bacteria, yet their practical methods saved more lives than chance alone. Every recovered soldier was proof that discipline, observation, and simple remedies could sometimes succeed where nature seemed determined to kill. For the Roman soldier, infection was the silent enemy that lingered long after the battlefield, and surviving it was often the greatest victory of all. Number 4. Life after the wound. Months after the battle, a soldier who survived his injuries faced a new struggle. His scar was a reminder of combat, but it also marked the limits of his body. If he healed well enough to march long distances, carry a shield, and hold formation, he could return to duty. The Roman army valued discipline and numbers, so any man who could still fight was pushed back into the ranks. For many, this meant proving their strength again through constant drills and long marches. Those who managed to endure were respected because scars were seen as proof of bravery and loyalty to Rome. Not everyone recovered fully. A man who was too weak for the battlefield but not completely useless could be reassigned. Some guarded supply lines and wagons, making sure food and weapons reached the front. Others were placed in watchtowers or small garrisons where less physical strength was required. Writing skills or basic literacy could move a wounded soldier into clerical duties, recording pay, supplies, or orders. Some were trained to guide recruits, passing on battlefield experience to the next generation. These roles allowed the army to keep valuable knowledge without risking a weak man in formation. For soldiers with severe disabilities, the path was different. A man who lost a leg or an arm, or who carried lasting damage from head wounds, could be discharged early. The official promise of Rome was generous. Veterans might receive a cash payout, a pension, or a grant of land in a new colony. These benefits served two purposes. They rewarded loyalty and also helped spread Roman culture by planting veterans and their families in conquered provinces. In practice, however, not all men received what they were owed. Payment depended on the commander's record, the mood of the Senate, and sometimes pure luck. Corruption or political neglect often left veterans with far less than promised. The reality for many wounded soldiers was harsh. Some returned home unable to farm or work, forcing them to beg on the streets. Scars became proof of service, but they did not always guarantee help. A number of veterans turned to wealthy patrons, offering loyalty in exchange for basic support, while others found work as bodyguards, mercenaries, or even trainers in gladiator schools where their combat experience had value. Each fate was different, shaped by the severity of wounds, social connections, and the empire's willingness to honor its promises. For a Roman soldier, surviving battle did not mean the end of hardship. Life after the wound was a second fight, one against poverty, neglect, and the limits of a damaged body. Number 5. Honor and stigma. In Roman society, the meaning of a wound depended on how and where it was received. A scar across the chest or the arms was seen as a mark of bravery, proof that the soldier had faced the enemy directly. Such scars could even bring admiration in public life, since courage on the battlefield was valued as a political and personal quality. Roman writers often stressed this point. Cicero mocked one of his opponents by demanding to see scars on his chest rather than on his back, making it clear that a wound taken while fleeing was a source of shame. A soldier who bore marks of open combat could be respected, even feared, since his body displayed visible evidence of loyalty to Rome and endurance under pressure. But scars did not always guarantee honor. Some injuries reduced a soldier's ability to serve, and in the army that meant diminished worth. A man who could no longer march, carry equipment, or hold the line in formation was often seen as a burden by officers. The Roman military was practical, and its discipline left little space for sentiment. Soldiers who limped permanently, who lost too much strength, or who became dependent on others could be treated as expendable. They might still live with comrades, but their presence was a reminder of weakness, something that did not fit easily into the image of an invincible legion. At the same time, within the close circle of a contubernum, or among veterans, attitudes were more complex. Bonds formed in battle were strong, and men who had shed blood together often respected each other regardless of later disability. Around campfires, veterans told stories, and scars became part of those tales. Each mark had its own story: an arrow from Parthia, a sword cut from Dacia, or a spear thrust from Germania. These stories built a shared culture of endurance and sacrifice. For the common soldier, scars were not only reminders of pain, but also a way of claiming status among peers. Outside the military, the picture shifted again. Some wounded veterans could gain sympathy from the public, using their scars to argue for pensions or land. Others found that deformities brought stigma, especially if their injuries made them unable to work or maintain a household. A missing limb might inspire fear or respect, but it could also isolate a man in daily life. Roman culture balanced admiration for visible courage with a harsh practicality about usefulness. A scar could open doors, but it could just as easily close them. For many, the honor and the stigma existed side by side, shaping how they were remembered not only by Rome, but by the people who had once fought beside them. Number 6. The Forgotten Legacy. Ancient Roman historians filled their works with stories of victorious generals, ambitious emperors, and decisive battles, but they rarely paused to describe the men who paid the highest price. The wounded soldier who stumbled back to camp after losing an eye, or the veteran who carried a broken rib for years, was often left out of official accounts. Rome celebrated triumphs with parades and monuments, yet the ordinary legionary with permanent scars usually disappeared into silence. This gap in written history is striking, but archaeology has uncovered what texts ignored. Excavations of Roman military cemeteries reveal bones that tell their own stories. Archaeologists have found skeletons with healed fractures in arms and legs, skulls showing signs of surgical cuts, and even evidence of amputations where the bone later smoothed over. These remains prove that soldiers sometimes survived brutal procedures and lived for years afterward. In some cases, arrowheads or spear tips were still lodged in bones, showing that men carried foreign objects inside their bodies until old age. These discoveries give us a picture of endurance more than glory. Many soldiers who survived their wounds likely returned to simple lives, farming or working in small towns. Some were granted land as part of their veteran rewards, and with family support, they managed to live out their days in relative peace. Others were not so fortunate. Severe injuries made it hard to provide for a household, and without steady income, some drifted into poverty. Begging in city streets was not rare, and scars served as visible proof when asking for charity. A few men turned to jobs that used their past experience, such as becoming private guards or trainers in gladiator schools, where their toughness was still valuable. The empire itself used veterans as symbols when convenient, but only briefly. A scarred soldier might appear in a triumphal parade to remind citizens of sacrifice, yet once the celebration ended, he often returned to obscurity. Unlike generals whose names were carved in stone, the legacy of the wounded lived mainly in their bodies and in the memory of comrades. Still, their contribution was immense. Every healed bone represented a man who had endured pain, yet continued to support Rome in some way. Without such resilience, the Roman military system could not have sustained its long wars. The forgotten wounded were the hidden cost of empire, men who carried the weight of campaigns not in history books, but in their own flesh. Their endurance, though overlooked, was one of Rome's quietest but most essential strengths.